Real-life monsters. The horrifying truth behind Wendigo psychosis and cannibalism. The wind howls through the boreal forests of North America, carrying with it a chill that settles deep in the bones. For the indigenous peoples of the subarctic regions, particularly the Algonquian-speaking tribes like the Ojibwe and the Cree, winter was not just a season of cold. It was a season of survival. It was a time when the snow piled high, game became scarce, and the threat of starvation was a constant looming shadow. It is from this landscape of isolation and extreme hunger that one of the most terrifying legends in folklore emerged, the Wendigo. But as we peel back the layers of this story, we find that the Wendigo is not merely a monster of myth. It is the center of a fascinating and horrifying medical and psychological phenomenon known as Wendigo psychosis. To understand the psychosis, we must first understand the entity. In the oral traditions of the North, the Wendigo is described as a gaunt, emaciated figure, its skin pulled tight over protruding bones. It smells of death and decay. Its eyes are glowing and sunken, and its lips are tattered and bloody. The most defining characteristic of the Wendigo, however, is its insatiable hunger. The legend dictates that every time the Wendigo consumes human flesh, it grows in size relative to the meal it just ate. Therefore, it can never be full. It is eternally starving, eternally hunting, and eternally empty. It represents the ultimate taboo, cannibalism. For centuries, this creature served as a cautionary tale. It was a personification of greed, selfishness, and excess in a culture that relied on communal sharing for survival. But at some point in history, the line between the metaphorical monster and the human mind began to blur. Early missionaries and explorers in the 17th and 18th centuries began recording strange accounts from the northern tribes. They spoke of individuals who, usually during the harsh famine months of winter, became convinced they were being possessed by the Wendigo spirit. This was not simply a fear of the dark. It was a specific, culturally bound mental deterioration. The symptoms, as described in historical records and later analyzed by psychiatrists, began with a profound form of dysphoria and anxiety. The victim would become withdrawn, staring into the fire for hours, unable to sleep. Then came the paranoia. They would begin to believe that the people around them, their friends, their family, their children, were beginning to look like lush, fat animals. The victim would report a burning sensation in their gut, a hunger that regular food could not satisfy. They feared that they were turning into the monster. This is what Western medicine eventually labeled Wendigo psychosis. It is classified as a culture-bound syndrome, meaning a psychiatric disorder that is recognized and manifests only within a specific culture. The fascinating aspect of this condition is the power of belief. Because the individual truly believed in the reality of the Wendigo spirit, their mind manifested somatic symptoms that aligned with the possession. One of the most infamous cases that brings this condition into sharp, terrifying focus is that of Swift Runner. In the winter of 1878, Swift Runner, a Plains Cree trapper who was well-liked and respected, walked into a Catholic mission in St. Albert, Alberta. He claimed that he was the only survivor of his family, stating that they had all died of starvation during the brutal winter. However, the priests and authorities were suspicious. Swift Runner did not look like a man who had been starving. He weighed nearly 200 pounds and appeared healthy. When police investigated his camp, they found a scene of absolute horror. Swift Runner had not only killed his wife, his mother, his brother, and his 6 children, but he had consumed them. He had boiled their fat and snapped their bones to suck out the marrow. When he was arrested and brought to trial, Swift Runner did not plead insanity in the way a modern court would understand. He claimed that the Wendigo spirit had entered his dreams and commanded him to eat. He described the transformation, the loss of control, and the overwhelming compulsion. In 1879, he was hanged for his crimes, But to those in his community, it was clear that the man known as Swift Runner had died long before the hangman's noose tightened. He had been consumed by the spirit. This brings us to a difficult question that anthropologists and psychologists have debated for decades. Was Swift Runner actually insane, or was he simply a desperate man making a cruel choice for survival? Using the Wendigo legend as a shield? Skeptics of Wendigo psychosis argue that famine cannibalism is a universal human behavior. When reduced to absolute starvation, humans across all cultures have historically resorted to eating the dead to survive. We have seen this in the Donner Party in America, the Holodomor in Ukraine, and plane crashes in the Andes. The argument is that the Algonquian people, having a strong cultural taboo against cannibalism, needed a mechanism to explain why a good person would do such a terrible thing. The Wendigo provided a scapegoat. It wasn't the father who ate his children. It was the evil spirit that took over his body. However, believers in the validity of the psychosis point out that many victims of the Wendigo possession had not yet reached the point of starvation where cannibalism becomes a biological imperative. Some were merely fearful of the food running out. Furthermore, there were cases where individuals requested to be executed before they could harm anyone. They felt the ice heart of the Wendigo freezing their chest and begged their tribesmen to kill them to prevent the transformation. This suggests a genuine mental break, a psychosomatic illness driven by intense cultural fear. The role of the community in this phenomenon cannot be overlooked. In these tribes, there were individuals known as Wendigo hunters or healers. The most famous of these was Jack Fiddler, an OG Cree shaman. Fiddler claimed to have defeated 14 Wendigos during his lifetime. In 1907, at the age of 87, Fiddler was arrested by the Royal Northwest Mounted Police for the murder of a woman who was believed to be turning into a Wendigo. The trial of Jack Fiddler was a clash of civilizations. To the Canadian court, Fiddler was a murderer who strangled a sick woman. To Fiddler and his people, he was a hero who had performed necessary euthanasia to save the camp from a monster. Fiddler explained that the woman had been crying out for flesh, that the spirit was visible to his shamanic sight. He believed that by killing the body, he was stopping the spirit from committing atrocities. Fiddler committed suicide before a verdict could be reached, escaping the judgment of a law that did not understand his world. As the 20th century progressed, reports of Wendigo psychosis began to vanish. As the indigenous tribes were forced into settlements, as their traditional way of life was dismantled, and as access to steady food supplies, however poor, became more common, the fear of the winter starvation faded. With the decline of the traditional belief systems and the introduction of Western medicine and education, the cultural framework that supported the psychosis eroded. You cannot be possessed by a spirit you no longer believe in. Today, Wendigo psychosis is largely considered a historical footnote in psychiatry, often cited in textbooks as the prime example of how culture shapes mental illness. But it serves as a grim reminder of the fragility of the human mind. It forces us to ask what happens when we are pushed to our absolute limits, not when we strip away the supernatural elements. The Wendigo represents the very real horror of starvation. It is the biological imperative to survive clashing with the moral imperative to remain human. The psychosis was perhaps the mind's way of shattering under that impossible pressure. In the modern world, we consume the Wendigo as pop culture. We see it in movies, video games, and creepypastas. It has become a generic horned beast, a monster for entertainment. But for the people of the subarctic forests, it was not a game. It was the embodiment of the cold, the hunger, and the terrifying realization that under the right circumstances, the monster is not lurking in the trees, it is waiting inside us. Exploring this topic requires us to look past the gore and the ghost stories. It requires us to look at the harsh reality of life in the pre-industrial North. It requires empathy for people like Swift Runner, who may have been monsters in their actions, but were also victims of a brutal environment. Whether you believe in the spirit world or the strict definitions of clinical psychology, the lesson of the Wendigo remains relevant. Greed and consumption, if left unchecked, will eventually consume the consumer. The silence of the northern woods keeps its secrets well. We may never know for certain if the ice hearts were real or metaphorical. But the records remain, written in the frantic hand of missionaries and the stoic reports of police officers, testifying to a time when men became monsters and the hunger never slept. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this video, learned something new, or simply want to see more content like this, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support truly helps the channel grow and reach more people. And if you have thoughts or ideas you'd like to share, feel free to leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next video.